Hello friends. Operational situation at the front on the 25th of February. We will start with you from the Limansky direction. We will talk in more detail about the Bakhmut direction today, about Avdeevka and Zaporizhia. Along the Limansky section of the front without significant changes. There were reports that Russian troops again went to the next attack. They managed to repel it. This is according to reports from the field, so we do not fix any changes. But here it should be said that there is some parallel, because, against the background of those reports, that the number of attacks by Russian troops is slightly decreasing, the number of attackers is decreasing, the intensity of artillery strikes is decreasing. We talked about the concentration of Russian forces in the Lyman direction quite large, and drawing parallels with the Sen direction. We see that yes, the concentration really remains significant, but, if we talk about the purchase, everything has turned into absolute positionality, including the Svetovo direction, Kotlyárovka, Kislovka, Tebayevka and Starch areas. That is, most likely the enemy will now wait again for the right moment to strike the bottom, but so far, we have not recorded any changes. And recently, I must say, the Sinkovka-Kupinsky direction as a whole, it has fallen out of the information field, due to the fact that the enemy has revised its plans, revised tactics and does not go into battle, does not conduct assault actions. In the Seversky direction, without any changes in the Bakhmut direction, we have added a little gray area. There are still a number of sections to be clarified, but now we will talk about this in more detail. As for the Bogdanovka site, it means that assault actions were taken from the Russian side, but not in the direction of the Valerianovka railway station, but in the direction of the fortified area, which is located between Vianovka and Bogdanovka. There are battles in this area. These battles continue, they have begun since yesterday. There was information, drone footage was published, but today we state that they continue. The situation is dynamic. The enemy naturally makes a very big bet now to occupy the fortified area, after which it would be possible to carry a flank strike. Although there is a fairly short shoulder between the positions, they will strengthen the onslaught on Bogdanovka due to this. And of course, a flank strike against the Russian troops in this case can no longer be inflicted, when they tried to stretch out in Bogdanovka itself. Therefore, now there are heavy battles between Bogdanovka and Alyanovka. A gray area has been added. A gray zone has also been added north of Ivanovo, so we have a mountain called Bobol. In this direction, Russian troops and his Derg are conducting assault operations. They are present in the area of the gray zone, that is, they enter. There are also a FU present in this area, so there are very heavy battles. The enemy is now extremely serious about increasing pressure on Ivanovskoye from the north. Therefore, the fighting continues, the situation remains in the future until further clarification, and due to the fact that the battles with varying success. We talked about this, that the vector of their attacks will change, that most likely they will try to strike from the north. Well, today, we see activity aimed precisely at advancing to Ivanovo from the north. As for Ivanovsky itself, in its eastern part, Russian troops continue to try to dislodge the garrison in the village. From the eastern part of the village, a number of attempts were made to attack and improve. Attempts were made to improve tactical positions, including along Sedovoye Street in the north direction. The pressure is serious, so very hard fights. Plus, there are also a number of attacks from Russian troops at the intersection of Sedovoye Street, from the area of the Stavkov Cascade. Therefore, there are also heavy battles going on here. Well, they tried to move further, meaning in the western direction to Shidna Street. We have made a number of attempts. Managed to repel the attacks. There were also attempts to advance south of Sedovoye Street, approximately to this area, to gain a foothold, and it was also possible to repel attacks. But in general, we say that the situation remains quite difficult, because we once said that the main goal of the Russian troops is to attack with the widest possible coverage. And when they already managed to occupy part of the cascade of stakes, part of the basements in the area of farm fields, accordingly, they were able to increase this pressure. And the second task for them is to attack Ivanovsko with an even wider scope, bearing in mind its northeastern part, and already come close from the north. That's why there are these attacks, and there are messages. A number of Russian military officers, for example, the same Ribber, he marks this area red, that is, under the control of Russian troops. But this is not quite true, because the fighting continues, the fighting is heavy, I repeat, with varying success. But the fact that Russian troops are entering this area is really true. We are now under very serious pressure on Bakhmut. The Bakhmut direction is coming from Bakhmut. One day about a month ago, one of the soldiers of the 93rd Brigade reported information that a very serious group was concentrating and could go at any moment of the offensive. Well, in general, these are the offensive actions of those forces that were transferred to Bakhmut from the enemy. We turn to the Avdeevka direction. There is a further clarification on the situation. We'll start with Stepovo. It means that a number of attacks have been launched. There are a number of statements from the Russian troops about the fact that you have completely retreated from Stepovo. The situation is visually unchanged. That is, according to the drone footage, there are no further advances of the Russian troops, there are no counterattacks from the IFU, respectively, and we also do not record any improvements from the tactical position. Therefore, the situation here is absolutely unchanged. But the fact that the enemy is trying to improve tactical positions is also there. It is possible to repel a number of attacks, so we state without changes. Stepovo is enough. The area of Stepovo, Burdik, the defense of the IFU is being held quite effectively. No matter what you say, but it really is. Moving on. So along Lastokin, and west of Avdeevka, as Sahim. Yesterday we noted something like this picture. That is, Russian troops also advanced along the beam, occupied one of the forest belts and most of Lastokin. Yesterday I said that the situation is being clarified, because there is a lot of information. On the daytime broadcast, I told you that there were attacks in the direction of the forest belts of Savdaysky, as Sahim in the evening. They also talked about it, that Russian troops came in, but not only came in. To date, the situation looks like this. Nevertheless, they completely occupied the forest belt of the west, parallel to Avdeevka as Sahim, and adjacent to it to the west of it. Attacks are now coming from Lastokin, mainly in small groups, because there are still stabilization measures on the part of the enemy. There are attacks in the direction of one of the intersections, while not only from Lastokin, but also Savdeevka as Sahim. In other words, the goal is to align the line along the forest belt approximately clearly. And then, as we said yesterday, they will try to climb in the north direction. This is just the same in order to take a typical one. They will also try to strike from the flank. There is such a moment. In the north, according to Severny, the day before yesterday and today, a number of messages from the Russian troops are coming. There is information that they managed to occupy the entire settlement, but not the day before yesterday, nor today. There is no visual confirmation of this. Moreover, heavy fighting continues in the Severny area. Well, of course, there are no photo-video confirmations with the Russian flag. Although the enemy presses, and most likely from Lastokin, having already carried out stabilization measures until the end, they will try to advance along the forest belts in the west, and then in the southwest direction, to carry out a number of attacks. This is exactly the same will be directed to the north and to the thin. Therefore, it cannot be said that everything is fine here, because the enemy is conducting further assault actions. It is still too early to talk about the stabilization of the situation in the Avdeevka direction. According to Pervomaysky-Novelsky, the main pressure is now between the settlements themselves, that is, the enemy is also trying to align the front line along one of the roads, along one of the forest belts. Attempts are continuing to improve the tactical situation on the part of the enemy, but we do not record any changes. Although it should also be added that the pressure here on Pervomayskaya too, in Pervomaysk itself, is not weakly coming from the Russian troops. According to Novelsky, without any changes, there are more, I would say, distracting strikes, that is small infantry groups, and this I would say, is more the activity of the DER. There has been a lot of news about Krasnogorovka-Kurakiv direction lately, especially today. They started yesterday evening, today it's just a full house. About the fighting in the city of Krasnogorskovka itself, and about the fact that Russian troops have already dispersed into it, about reports that they have come close, and so on and so on. So the first one. Naturally, we have already talked with you about attempts in the direction of Krasnogorovka. Along Geologichная Street, there was also in the area of the veins of the shaft of the Trudovskaya mine. But these attempts are not aimed at Krasnogorovka itself, and now, so far in any case, we state from the information that there is an attempt to gain a foothold along the cascade of the Stavki and the river. That is, to increase the pressure on the veins, the trunk of the Trudovskaya mine, and accordingly, to gain a foothold already along Geologichная Street and intersections. Then continue the attacks in the western direction, because we also added a gray zone here, as you noticed, because there are a number of attacks not only along Geologichная Street in the northern direction, but from Mariinka itself in the northwestern direction. There are a number of attacks by Russian troops, further attacks along the forest belts, not only along Georgievka itself, but it already turns out that attempts are being made to the northeast of it. And just the same, based on the vector of attacks by Russian troops, we can assume that the main goal is just the same cascade of stakes. Why? Because, well, as if everything leads to this here, that they are going to the stake resting, this is no longer Krasnogorovka. And if we talk about something more serious tactically, of course we talked about surrounding Krasnogorka, cutting off its logistics, but it doesn't make sense to talk about it now. The main goal still remains a cascade of bets, to level the front line. It's just that these attacks in the direction of Krasnogorka, they caused quite a serious information boom. Although I do not deny the activity of the Russian Derg in this direction, it is precisely under the formulation, in order, among other things, to disperse our strikes, to disperse the effectiveness of aerial reconnaissance, using it as much as possible for a wide coverage. Well, of course, artillery strikes. According to Georgievka, we do not record any changes. Assault operations are continuing, both in the Garden Association and in the northeastern part of Georgievka, north of the Georgievsky Stavka. There are a number of attempts by the Russian troops to bypass one of the supports, which we have in the Garden Association. Harvest is located along the fields to the south of the Garden Association. Therefore, a gray area has also been added here, adjusted. But in principle, as we have said in previous days, we are now seeing very high activity on a wide sector of the front from the enemy. In the Kurakovsky direction, that is, they attack everywhere. We will speak as it is. That is, very, very much. And so, the main goal is to naturally find a gap in the defense. Therefore, it cannot be said that their goal is even a cascade of bets as much, because there are a lot of attacks. And now where they will be able to catch on, gain a foothold, they will press there, where they will find a gap in the defense. Heavy fighting also continues in the victory area, without significant changes, as in Novomikhailovka. Although the situation here is also quite difficult due to the fact that there are a number of attacks north of Novomikhailovka. Quite a lot of attempts on the part of Russian troops are being recorded in the southern direction, to strike from the fortified area, well, that is, to advance as much as possible to the northern part, to the northern outskirts of Novomikhailovka. That is, to increase the pressure on the locality itself, also from the third direction. It is possible to repel these attacks, but the enemy does not give up trying, so there are fights here. And now we are moving on to work on. At work, we have adjusted the situation, added a gray zone as you noticed. A lot of further information was received after yesterday's broadcast. There was a lot of misinformation. So, the first one, by the evening, information was published, and reliable, visually confirmed. It was also discussed in my Telegram channel in the comments. That assault group, which drove into the northern Cherevnaya Street, means approximately to this area. It was mostly broken up, as were both armored vehicles. Not one was blown up by a mine, as there was information. One drove off. No, the second one was also blown up by a mine. Therefore, the Russian troops failed to gain a foothold. But the fact that they visited this area, of course, says a lot. As I said yesterday, it says a lot. At the same time, there were attempts to advance in the area of the southern outskirts, between the fortified area and the outskirts, and it was possible to repel the attack. In other words, it cannot be said that the enemy managed to catch on somewhere and gain a foothold in the very work on. It is possible to repel these attacks, but the situation is very difficult, because the pond is very, let's say so, seriously, and enough combat-ready units are sent, based on where they are, where they went. At the same time, they attack from both the southeast and the west. Let's talk about one more moment that is extremely important. It is most likely that the work has been set exactly the next goal, not so much Ivanovskaya, not so much Georgievka, not so much the same victory, to completely take control of it and throw the Apuoi. It's not the same Novomikhailivka. How much work has been done, based on what we are currently observing in this direction, including the information background. Why is work extremely important for the Russian command? Because this is the locality for which there was a very long battle, and of course, the capture of this locality by Russian troops. It will play a very important role in shaping, I would say, how our mobilization will take place, and so on, and so on. Morale will have a very serious impact on this. For morale and morale. Why? Because this is the locality for which there were battles for about several months, fierce at the same time. And if they manage to take it, then it turns out that the counteroffensive on Tokmak Melitopol, which was going on, it will come to naught. Everything that has been achieved. Because then, well, it's extremely difficult to hold fields and landings with that pressure. But the main goal is to work for, so you need to understand that now there will be very, very much pressure on work for, because it will play into the hands of the enemy. Taking this settlement is not just as a tactical victory of some kind. Another locality there. No, oh, it's much more, much more. I don't want to talk about it yet. As they say, we will look, because now there are very, very heavy battles for the settlement. On our part, everyone also understands perfectly well what this is fraught with, and the markets were asked to comment. It means that there was information yesterday that the enemy might refuse to attack, because information was received from Russian media fighters that they were reducing the pace of pressure on the settlement itself. This is really true. That is, again, we saw another attempt when they came from 3 directions. I just commented on it these days, to attack the market themselves. Yes, they failed to gain a foothold, to catch on somewhere. In other words, everything remained unchanged. Therefore, after reviewing everything, they will naturally for some time, as with the Sinkovka area, let's talk with Sinkovka itself. The Sinkovka area itself, they will go on the defensive somewhere, they will attack somewhere, but it will be of a positional nature of the fighting. But, at the same time, they will naturally resume at some point, after perhaps 2 or 3 months, there is a very serious pressure. In other words, they will try to implement a new surprise effect. But, here an important role was also played by those missile strikes, that were the HIMARS systems. Do not forget, when there were 3 arrivals according to the polygons, according to the construction of the Kherson region. Then they suffered significant losses, and naturally all those who were 200th or 300th then, it happened a few days ago, they could just storm the market. Therefore, it is also necessary to look at it from this angle, that after the losses they have suffered, they need some time. Moreover, combat-ready units were built there, and not just mobilized. They had just been trained there before in the Crimea for several additional months. And of course, they had to carry out assault actions and stabilization measures in the Rynnyk area, and in general along the left bank of the Dnieper. Therefore, after the losses suffered, naturally, and against the background of the fact that it was not possible to catch on, gain a foothold in those positions where Russian troops entered and fought. As you remember, they were advancing within the gray zone. They were thrown back to their original positions. There was only one discarded, it turns out. One, or rather 2. One retreated, and subsequently, The wounded 300th also came out. Therefore, without fixing any changes, we naturally revised our plans for this site.